Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Busybird Publishing. It's Wednesday morning, which just feels like yesterday was Wednesday, but anyway, my name is Blaise Van Heck.
Yesterday was Wednesday.
No, today's Wednesday.
You sure?
Yes.
I'm Leslie Gamanis.
We are obviously from Busybird Publishing, and every Wednesday we like to check in to talk about something to do with writing, publishing, books, stories, really. And we like to highlight some of the books that we've published. So this, as we said last week, we're going to talk about fiction this week. And I have two very different genres of books, and we're going to talk a little bit about that, and then we're going to talk about the process of writing. So this is part of a series, so book one of a series. The series is called When Magic Awakes, and the actual book is Return of the Sleeping Warriors by Petra Costa. So this is fantasy. I'll read a little bit of the blurb. It is a world where magic once ruled, where mystical beasts and power-hungry magic wielders fought for control. The balance ever shifting between order and anarchy. It is our world, and the struggle is all but forgotten. Old legends whisper of the battles once fought. Folklore gives hints of the dangers that still exist. But it all happened such a very long time ago. And you cannot believe every old fairy tale you read, can you, Les?
Really?
I don't know. Okay. Michael has been dealing with a lot lately. A creepy family moving in next door, a relaxing family holiday where a strange discovery leaves him anxious and unnerved. And now he's having recurrent nightmares. Nightmares shared by his sister Dana. With an ancient evil starting to unlock its powers, Michael must accept his family's legacy and come to terms with their emerging abilities before their quiet Melburnian street is turned into a war zone. Intriguing.
Yes.
Yes. So this is by Petra, who's a local author. So, fantasy. And now we also have a book called Entropy by Karen Harbert.
What is KM Harbert?
Well, it is K.M.
Oh, you just
Harbert.
gave away her identity. Oh my God.
Entropy is the story of three generations linked by circumstance and secrecy, following them through discovery, growth, betrayal, loss and regeneration. Against the backdrop of war, outback railway towns, forced adoptions and the stolen generation, the characters each stare down the contradictions that undermine who they think they are, and a restlessness that threatens the belief that they can be genuinely happy. Along the way, Entropy explores a bush philosophy of what it is to be human, to live with a storm inside the calm. So more of a contemporary, well, not contemporary because it goes back into the 70s, but contemporary and looking back into the 70s. So very different genres of book. And so what I wanted to talk to today, Les, because
Yes.
you are a fiction writer.
That's a fiction.
What do you think is the main difference between writing fiction as opposed to non-fiction?
What sort of non-fiction?
Well,
I mean, memoir is very similar to novel writing.
fiction somewhere in the middle. So let's just say non-fiction, like a self-help book or something.
Okay.
Or even a how-to book.
So difference. I actually think they're very similar.
Yeah?
I think everything has a story that it wants to tell.
Yeah.
Whereas with a self-help book, it's a story of how the self-help book is going to help you do whatever it's trying to help you do in your life. Whereas with fiction, it's a story about certain characters and where they're trying to get. And
I mean, really, there is always an element of ourselves in our writing, isn't there?
Yeah.
No matter what.
yeah.
Do you think there's much difference between fantasy and more contemporary fiction?
No, all fiction's the same.
Yeah?
People try and tell you they're different, but well,
It's just about
There it is.
It's about building a world, isn't it? Or a believable.
well, in every story, what you need is a character who wants something.
Yep.
So that's the goal of every single story. So it might be a quest-based thing, like The Hobbit is characters want to get this treasure. But even in The Hobbit, you look at something like, I'm going to get really political with The Hobbit. In The Hobbit, the dwarves want this treasure, but it's revealed later that Gandalf wants that dragon eliminated because he knows there's a war coming. So all the characters have desires that they're trying to fulfill. But you get someone like Catcher in the Rye, which isn't quest-based. It's like he just wants to get home and he wants peace of mind. So in every sort of book, you know, and that's a children's fantasy book versus a literary classic, it's the same objective that a character wants something and they're pursuing something.
Do you think it's harder to write fiction or non-fiction?
I don't know. I think people's minds are geared differently. So some people would actually do a lot better with fiction than they would with non-fiction, and vice versa. Like I know with technical stuff, I can't write it. I struggle. But then I know authors who do that so well, but struggle with fiction.
But you can quite easily write an article or a blog post or something, and in quite a efficient amount of time too.
Oh well, usually I just outsource that to Fiverr and just tell you I've done it.
Okay, that's one.
Oh, sorry, did I say it louder for a second? No, yeah, but then I mean, as I said, I look at everything as a story. So even an article is a story of whatever the objective of that article is going to be. So how do you write a blurb or about the publishing industry?
And
it's still a story.
They're always a story.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Do you think it's harder to write one or the other, or like in terms of, you know, because a lot of people come to us with their roadblocks, if you like, about what they're writing, and I think usually it takes a lot longer to write a novel as compared to a non-fiction book.
Yeah.
Why do you think that is?
I think probably when people are going to write a non-fiction book, particularly a how-to or a self-help book, something like that, they have a very
Hold these up so that
they have a
see the
very
cover.
clear objective of what their message is going to be.
Yeah.
So it's like how to gain wealth through property, for
Yeah.
example. So I know already what I'm going to sit down. With books, not these two necessarily, but like with people who want to write fiction, I think too often they don't actually know what they want to write. They have like a snippet of an idea and they go sit down, they start writing, and that snippet fuels them for about 20 pages, and then it's like, I don't know where I go next. So I think novels are hard to write because too many people go into it not knowing what their story is. And they try and work it out on the fly, which you can do to some extent, but unless you have a really clear idea of what your destination is, and you don't have to actually know how it finishes, you just need to know that the character's going to get to this point, then you're really going to struggle because you're not going to know how you're going to get them to that point because you don't even know what that point is.
What do you think is the biggest roadblock for people wanting to write a novel, for instance? I mean, and fiction isn't necessarily just a novel. It could be short stories. It could be novella.
So I think the biggest roadblock is the same for
any sort of writing.
Yeah, it's just discipline. It's really hard to sit down and write every day and to build it up into something book size. A lot of people don't have that discipline. They feel that it needs to be a magical ride, and when it actually comes out being hard work, they don't think they're doing it right, so they abandon it.
A lot of people start a lot of new ideas,
which are exciting
new
to them.
novels or new short stories, what have you, and because it gets hard, they give up, and so they have half a dozen unfinished projects.
Yeah, and so it's. I mean, I think the first one's discipline is just to sit down, for yourself to sit down and just to write, and that's irrespective of how much you don't like the idea at the time, how stuck you are, how scared you are. I mean, I know a lot of very accomplished writers who are very insecure because they obviously know what could be wrong with what they're trying to write, so they always have a fear of not realising that, which is really common. But they tackle it anyway because that's the only way to move forward. The only way to do anything is to actually write. That hasn't just come out of nowhere. Petra has.
These are both decent, paid word counts.
Yeah. So Petra and KM, they've sat down and just told themselves they're going to write and they're going to write and they're going to write, and that's the only way anything gets finished.
Yeah.
There's no magic formula. Too many people look for a magic formula like, how do you write so much? It's like, well, I just sit down and write, and that's the goal. I mean, everyone here, you yourself, you've got books out. They were written because you told yourself, I'm going to sit down and I'm going to write.
Yeah. How many projects do you
26.
ever have at one time that you're working on?
1.5.
1.5?
So I'll always be working on something new, generally. Depending on how much time I have, I may revise something at the same time. But having said that, like if I say I'm going to revise something, so I might have a book that's 30 chapters, I would only read one chapter a day. So it's not going to be my main preoccupation.
Yeah.
And it's not occupying the part of my brain which is writing, it's occupying like the revision side. And also find when I do that revision, it's like a really good warm up before I then sit down and just try and write.
Yeah.
Because the writing is always harder, because the revision you have something there to work with.
Yeah.
The
and
writing
you're
you have
having
to
access sort of your imagination, your creativity, I guess.
Yeah, to write you have to, you have to fill that blank page.
So last week we were talking about, when people get to the design stage, that quite often they start fiddling with the text. And your blog this week is going to be about that kind of stuff. But that actually segues into your actual, when you feel like you're ready for publication. A lot of people probably aren't, but also they haven't had other people read it.
No.
And quite often they don't get other people to read it until it's almost ready for publication. It's like, it's kind of too late.
Yep.
I mean, it's not, but it's going to really slow down the publishing process and it's going to cost you more money.
When you finish something, I mean, you should go through it until you feel you can't get anything more out of it, and then you should just put it aside for a little while and go back to it. But then you need to actually find some people who can read what you've written and give you some feedback that's going to be constructive. Family doesn't count.
And that should happen before the editing process.
Yeah, family doesn't count. Family saying, oh, it's good, doesn't really mean anything, or what are you wasting your time for?
Or sometimes they say it's not good. Yeah. And that can be...
And they might just say that because they don't understand what you're doing. And
you might not be readers.
Yeah, and you need to have like a small tight-knit trusted group.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember speaking to someone at Breaking the Code Writers Festival last year. Was that last year or this year?
Last year.
Yeah.
What year are we in?
Yeah, and I met this really nice guy. He was writing. He'd written the book, and he was really struggling with confidence because he'd given it out to some people I hadn't liked. And I said, "How many people did you give it out to?" He said, 20. And I go, "Look, just the law of averages there is you're going to get people who don't like it because not everyone likes everything." Yeah. You can. But it's like Sam's favourite book, 50 Shades of Grey.
Yeah.
I always point there because Sam's behind the camera. Yeah, there's people who love that, but there's other people who don't. That's just what's going to happen.
Yeah, but to get feedback for books, someone doesn't actually have to like it.
No.
They can just help you realise what you're trying to do. Like, you and I write very differently, and we can give, it's not my style of writing the way you write and vice versa, but we know what each other is trying to do. And so we can give each other criticism or feedback or whatever to get it as good as it can be.
Yeah. Well, giving feedback's an art in itself. So there's people, sorry, I'm going to actually annoy people. No, actually I'm not going to annoy them. I'm going to piss them off. There's people I wouldn't go to for feedback because I just know that they don't click with what I'm doing or what I'm trying to do, or how do you say this delicately? Very incapable of providing feedback which is in line with my vision. Rather, they're writers rather they're writers who go, why don't you do this, 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 and this, and then do this, and do this, and I'm listening and thinking, that's the way you'd write the book. I'm trying to do this. You're actually now writing a different story. And you see that a lot in workshop groups and feedbackers and some terrible editors who just take you in the direction you're not going because they can't separate their own intent from yours.
And that's when you know that you have a good editor, when they will give you feedback or choices of how to make the book better without rewriting you how they would write it.
Yeah.
A lot of times editors will go in and rewrite whole passages, and that's not the intention of an editor.
No.
Also, I think not all writers are good at giving feedback because they aren't actually very good at looking at a piece of text and being able to articulate what is good and bad about it.
Yeah, that's true.
Like book reviewers are able to articulate this, how the story works and what's good about it, but they're not necessarily writers or even editors.
Well, some are just idiots.
No, but there's lots of good reviewers out there.
There are lots. That's why I said some. I didn't say all. There are a lot of really good reviewers out there, but there are a few, I think, who are morons.
For instance, when someone says about a story, I couldn't get past 5 pages, and so I give it a 1 out of 5. Well,
You don't.
that's not really a review because you haven't actually read the whole story. So
No.
you can't really bag something if
Well,
you
you
haven't.
can.
Well, you can, but you
Don't-
shouldn't.
You shouldn't.
You shouldn't actually have a negative opinion about something unless you've actually read it yourself. Because quite often someone has recommended a book to me and I've read it and I haven't liked it, and vice versa. Sometimes I've heard all of this negative stuff about a book and I've read it and actually I quite like it. I can see what they don't like about something.
I'll give you an example of Ryan O'Neill's Very Brilliant Careers, which won the Oz Prime Minister's Literary Award 2 years ago now. And I got a 1-star rating from somebody on Goodreads. And I messaged a person and said, I really like this book. Do you mind telling me what you didn't like about it? And she goes,
They didn't actually say why?
And she
on
goes,
the
I
review?
found it, she didn't say in the review, she just
No.
rated it 1 star.
Okay.
And she goes, I found it too highbrow. I had to give it up after 11 pages.
Yeah.
It's like, well, you shouldn't be rating or reviewing it. You can
Yeah,
say
that's
you
not
didn't
your
finish
style.
it, that's fine.
Mm.
But you might have been page 12 where it hooked you. You read 11 pages of, a 300-page book. So, Sam, how much is 11? Oh, God. I don't know, let's say about 5% of the book or whatever. It's like, you can't judge it on that,
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
like saying, I read this much,
Yeah.
and that's it.
Yeah. And some stories have sort of a slow burn.
Yeah.
And same with movies. I mean, I don't usually abandon a movie until I've sort of at least watched half of it.
Unless it's Fury Road.
Unless we won't start talking about movies because we might be here all day. Okay, so what tips can we give people about writing fiction? One, I think, is to find a writing group.
Yep.
Or at least 1 or 2 people who you can share your stuff with backwards and forwards, not just you giving them stuff, but vice versa. Because actually reading other people's stuff is really good for your skill.
Oh man, that's a
as well.
tip we always say, and we probably haven't brought up enough, is just one of the best ways to learn about writing is to read as much as you can. And read diverse things. Don't just read whatever genre you're writing in.
Yep.
Read a lot of stuff to see how things are done, and you actually pick up stuff about structure, phrasing.
And even just punctuation,
Yep.
spelling, and also I think the rhythm of sentences, long versus short sentences, how that works. For instance, in like a whodunit, if there's some high intensity stuff in a book, the sentences will be short and sharp because that's to show that there's pace happening. So little things like that people learn by reading copiously. Really people should be reading a lot. Read the classics as well as the popular stuff.
Like Twilight.
So, reading, be part of a writing group, or find someone if you can't find a writing group, or and sometimes it takes a little bit to find a writing group that suits you.
Did you ever draw that from scratch?
No, I think Petra and Kev did that together.
I thought he did.
I don't know. You'll have to ask him.
Find a writing group, read.
Yep.
No plan. You don't have to plan the whole book out, but just prepare the world.
Well, I don't want to assume, but I'm thinking that Petra has actually, because it's part of a series, and I know she's close to finishing the second book. I would guess that she has actually planned out the series so that she knows what is in each book. Is that normally what happens? I haven't written a series.
I imagine with fantasy you would probably do that quite a bit. That you'd have everything down in broad strokes.
Yeah.
So I mean, with Petra too. Sorry, I hope I don't misrepresent her. It's saying she's married with 2 children, and
And
she
she's
must
still
have a busy life.
managed.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
she's written that, which is awesome. Too many people use excuses about why they can't write.
Well, Jodie Picoult, I don't know if that's how you... Yakult.
No, it's a yogurt.
She writes pretty much every year, I think. I don't know how many books she's got, but she has 4 kids. And she says she writes at the kitchen table while all of this activity is around her. I don't think I could manage that, but she still manages to bring out a book often.
I'd probably call the cops on you
What?
if you're writing at Jodie Picoult's table with all her kids around you. Oh, what are you doing in her place? When she's just breaking in to write your book.
Yeah,
You think it's a magic table?
yeah, maybe.
No.
Well, even J.K. Rowling was in coffee shops with her baby in the pram when she first started writing Harry Potter.
Yeah.
Yep. So she was a single mum with a baby and managed to, write Harry Potter.
Judging by Harry Potter, she probably just left the kid in the closet.
Maybe. All right,
Sam,
so
that's a ridiculous thing to do.
let's recap, Les, because we're going all over the place.
Sam's going out.
Read a lot.
Read a lot.
Be in a writing group.
Be in the writing
Stop
group.
fidgeting.
Stop fidgeting. Do workshops. If you don't know how to write a book, do some workshops. Do some tertiary education.
Yeah.
Even
just short courses.
short courses, yeah.
Because that's
also workshops.
also a place that you might meet other people that you can, buddy up with.
Yep.
In terms of writing.
And even stuff like manuscript assessments can teach you a lot about what you're doing right and what you're not doing quite right. Although everyone has their own style, own voice, own technique, there are some things that are fundamental to all forms of writing, like structure and all that sort of stuff. And
I think too, the other thing is, if you are have a partner who doesn't really understand what you're doing or doesn't support what you're doing,
you should buy some cyanide. No, okay.
It does make it harder, so that's why it's really important to find other writers who you can hang out with.
Yep.
Because otherwise you start feeling very isolated.
Yeah,
and also your partner's not going to be good for feedback or for support.
Particularly after the cyanide.
Yeah.
Other writers understand your own frustrations and your aspirations like other people can't. So other writers empathise with you and you can empathise with them. And it's a very select group to actually be creative and to want to write. And only others in the same field understand that.
What is our number one tip to write a book?
Right.
Yeah, sit down and write. It's as simple as that.
There's no magic formula.
Even if it's 15 minutes a day,
Yep.
even if it's, while you're having breakfast, you write a few sentences. Something every day.
Yep. Well, that's it. There's no magic formula. You have to, everyone in the end has to do the same thing, which is just sit down and write.
Yeah.
And you can feel tired, stressed, have kids running around, all that sort of stuff. It doesn't matter because they're just all going to be ultimately excuses for why you're not doing it. In the end, everyone has to sit down and just put their words on the page, and that's the only way they go from a few words to a whole book.
Yep.
And you have to do that regularly, not like once every 3 months, but productively and constructively.
Yep. So we have quite a few ways that we help people. One is you and I mentor people in writing. We also have workshops. So we have things like our Publish for Profit, which is just talking about publishing, and we have our book camp, which is coming up at the end of July.
Yep.
We have our Bali writing retreat in November, and every now and again we do other little workshops like life writing or fiction writing and things like that, depending on what people ask us about.
Yep.
And you and I also do workshops within libraries and with Breaking the Code.
Yep. Writers' festivals.
Yeah, writers' festivals. So, even if you are starting out on your journey, just even being part of our mailing list is great because we have lots of resources.
You come to something like open mic night.
Open mic night once a month, so that's next Wednesday, every third Wednesday of the month. That's a really good place to try out your work or even just listen to what other people are doing.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's about it from today from Blaze and Les at Busybird Publishing. Thanks for listening. Oh, wait on. What are we going to talk about next week?
Sam, what are we talking about next week?
We might talk about editing next week. How to find an editor, what an editor does, and why they're really important.
I hear they edit.
They do edit,
Yeah,
but
done it.
people don't
Done
even
that tour.
realise that most books have an editor behind them. They should have an editor behind them.
Most books.
Most books, yeah. Thanks.
See ya.
ya.
Just noticed you're all blue and you brought blue